It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
2 consecutive months, though, of price declines deserves attention from us this morning because it doesn't signal that the market is in trouble, but it does suggest that the rapid growth phase is giving way to more favourable conditions for buyers. How are you finding all of that at the moment?
I think you stated that quite well. Although the market has declined ever so slightly, it's possible that it's shifted more in favour of purchases, or purchasers have easier conditions when going out and finding a property in the current market. And we also need to be mindful that it is July, which is always a bit of a soft month for property here in Adelaide with bad weather conditions, etc. But yes, softer market conditions, fewer people through the door, it opens. Purchasers have a bit more choice, a bit more time in deciding where they're going to purchase and the conditions they're going to attach to their offers.
You know, I've just thought of this as you're speaking. We talk about vendors, we talk about buyers all the time, we talk about the softer market. One thing that we don't really talk about are those people that are working in the industry, agents, real estate companies. They've got to adjust as well, and sometimes that can be sort of second guessing, like, holy smoke, you know, everything has changed here. You've got to adapt, you know, you go into this, where is my next sale coming from? When are we coming out of this? So there is this whole psychology, isn't it, for people like yourself?
Absolutely. And I suppose when things change, it's important to keep in mind what you can control, what is in your control. We can't control interest rates, we can't control government policy or legislation, but you can control how you're managing the campaign, how open and honest you're being with your vendors and purchasers, keeping everyone well informed to the changes and what's happening in the market, and then working with the buyers you have and trying to create the best outcome you can for your vendor.
Yeah, and despite, we should put this caveat out there, despite the recent pullback in Adelaide, property values remain around 10% higher than this time last year, which really does highlight the market's resilience, because that's what it comes down to. Adelaide is very resilient.
Absolutely. And while sentiment is possibly down and numbers through the opens are lower, all the fundamentals for Adelaide and Adelaide's property market are still there. There's a lot of demand. It's a great place to live. People will continue moving here. Supply is limited to an extent, although government is trying to do things about that. So everything that's necessary to maintain a strong market is still there. We've had one of the strongest property runs in terms of growth that Australia's ever experienced. So it was inevitable that at some time it had to soften.
Now, since we were talking about combining 2 properties together, I've got a real-world case here with me, because many years ago I bought 2 properties that were side by side. The interesting part is that neither one of these properties were for sale. What I did, I sold a property. I couldn't find a property that I wanted. So I looked around where I wanted to live. Then I got out of my car and started door knocking. Yep, 99%, maybe 99.9%. It's a no, not interested, door slams. Okay, that's fine. But I did find this house that I would end up living in, and the owner said that they were thinking of selling in 6 months' time. Well, no, I'm buying now. What's your decision? They called me back the next day and said, yes, we accept your price. So I lived in one. I rented out the other with a clear plan to hold both of these properties for 5 to 10 years before developing the site. Unfortunately, and this is the lesson for you, I sold too early. Not long afterwards of me selling, the zoning changed to allow multi-unit developments, and I missed out on a significant uplift in value. So the lesson is definitely property will always reward patience. If your long-term strategy is sound, don't let short-term thinking rob you of future gains. It is a Monday. We are in Adelaide. Mike is with us there. Yeah, that's a bit of a sad story. I don't tell that one too often for obvious reasons, Mike.
Well, I'm impressed with your prospecting skills. Maybe you can give us agents a few tips, because two neighbours right next to one another, that's quite hard to come by. Well done on securing them in the first place.
I should explain that one step further. So there were people that were living in the property that I wanted to move into in terms of owner-occupier, but it was a rental next door, which was on a 1,012 square metre site. It was a big old 50s house that they had converted into two-bedroom units, and then there was a one-bedroom unit out the back. So I inherited 3 rental properties on the one site, and they were actually very keen to move that on. So, yeah, that was a win.
Yeah, well done. And I suppose back to the point, time in the market rather than timing of the market. Property rewards patience, as you so rightly state.
Oh, well, good morning, Craig, to you and your listeners. Yes, at the Productivity Commission, we've been asked by the government to come up with a plan to improve housing supply to help in the push to make housing more affordable for all Australians. So the report that we've put out a couple of weeks ago is really the first step. And those reform directions are our initial views on how we can get more homes in the right places with better connections to transport and infrastructure and easier and faster approvals. So what we're doing right now is testing those ideas through a period of consultation before we put our final report to government next year.
Yeah, the current planning rules, they are being identified as a major constraint on the housing supply in Australia. If a block, for example, can only accommodate 1 or 2 homes, I mean, that is a bit of a problem while demand in the property sector just keeps on rising. So are we effectively restricting the amount of housing available before construction even begins?
Look, that's a really good question, Craig, and we see in the report that this is really occurring at 3 levels. So the first is in the land use supply rules, so the land use and approvals space, so what we can use land for and where we can build and what we can build, and that's things like, as you mentioned, the height and how many dwellings can be on a block, for example. Then there's the approvals process, which can be slow and take people a long time and require lots of referrals and cost. And then there's also the connections to important infrastructure, transport, utilities and the like. And all of these play a role in how feasible it is to build and where. But the first part of your question, Craig, went to this important issue about, are people willing to embrace this greater density? And I think we've seen people becoming more willing. You know, they want to be able to live near where they work. They want to have their children and grandchildren be able to live in the same suburbs where they grew up. We've seen building go around activity centres where you do have great connections to public transport and other connections. So I think people are moving in this direction.
Yeah, I just want to sort of pick up on that a little bit more, because the big problem in the supply is when housing becomes unaffordable and people are pushed further from employment centres. Now, in this market, that means longer commutes, which in turn is more expense as they have to fill up their vehicles at the Bowser. Less access, of course, to opportunities and potential lower productivity. I think the report is also saying that the housing supply isn't just a property issue. It is an overall economic issue for the country at large.
Absolutely, Craig. So if people can live close to family and to work and other connections, we know it is better all around. It's better for the community and it's better for the economy. Some of the things you pointed to are exactly right. They're closer to work opportunities and they can take up those opportunities and be more productive in terms of what they're doing. So that location aspect, having homes where people want them and need them, is really important. And that's why our report points to some of the things that we actually put in the way of that through our regulatory system. Things that, for example, require a certain number of car parking spaces, certain sizes of apartments, and a whole lot of rules, you know, things like balcony sizes or things that people should be able to choose for themselves that actually add to the cost of apartments and other buildings and make them less affordable for people. So we say all of those rules should also be looked at.
And Cotality, I see that they recorded a 0.6% fall in Brisbane dwelling values back in July that we talked about. That is the consecutive monthly decline. The deterioration has been unusually rapid, with Brisbane's available stock moving from about 25% below its 5-year average in February to about 6% above it now. So Lots of talking points there.
There certainly is a lot of talking points in relation to the Brisbane property market, and I think what I would love to unpack is, breaking down that headline data to understand what we are seeing at a local level. So you are right that the monthly movement for all dwellings in Brisbane showed a decline in the median value of negative 0.6%. So for context, that's a decline of about $14,000 in the median dwelling value across the month. But as you've rightly pointed out, we are seeing more options for buyers because the total listing volumes have increased substantially. However, an important thing to note is that new listings have actually declined month on month. And what that tells us is that vendors also have a level of uncertainty, and we are seeing fewer sellers bring those properties to the market. So what we're seeing is a standoff between buyers and sellers at the moment, and that's also reflected in declining auction clearance rates.
Yeah, it was interesting from realestate.com.au. They reported last week that Brisbane home prices had fallen for a second consecutive month, ending roughly 3.5 years of this uninterrupted growth. The interesting point here, though, I think, Melinda, isn't simply that prices have fallen. It's the change in buyer psychology. Like the market is moving away from the environment where buyers felt that they had to act immediately or risk being priced out. That is a completely different psychology now.
It certainly is. No longer do we have FOMO, or that fear of missing out in the market. We have what we call fear of overpaying, or FOOP, in the market. We're seeing that a lot of buyers are expecting all properties to be discounted in the current market, and yet because we're seeing that increase in the total volume of listings for sale, that's reflective of the fact that days on market is increasing, and a lot of vendors are not willing to accept a lower price. And in fact, we're also seeing sales volumes decline. And if a buyer does not meet the expectations of a seller, we're often seeing properties being pulled from the market. The data that we're talking about from Cotality, which shows that property values have declined month on month, this is showing settled sales data, but it's not necessarily picking up what's happening across every property.
Yeah, and further to Cotality, Brisbane's supply position has changed, as in what you're talking about. Back in February, total stock available for sale was about 25% below the 5-year average. Now it is around 6% above that average. That's a significant change in the balance between buyers and sellers. And this kind of helps explain why the market can feel considerably softer even before prices have fallen dramatically.
Yes, it's always a positive thing, actually, when buyers have more choice, and it's always a positive thing when days on market are extended. We're now in a market where properties are listed for sale. Buyers have time to consider their options because there's more options that are available, and they have time to complete thorough due diligence. And where there's motivation from the vendor to meet the market, there's also some good buying opportunities, and we are seeing that reflected in the dwelling value decline month on month. However, as I pointed out, not all vendors are willing to meet the market. So when we have a situation where the vendors will hold firm on price, perhaps there's lower motivation to sell quickly. In those instances, either the buyers need to meet the vendor's expectations or those properties are being pulled from the market. So we're certainly seeing different things happen in different parts of the market and in different segments of the market as well.
We are your local source for unbiased, expert insights into the world of real estate. We are not a real estate company. Our only objective is to help you better understand the real estate market.
The proposed rezoning, as reported by PropTrack, this is putting thousands of homes around a city centre and hospital, which does change the conversation completely. My question to you, Adam, this morning is, how are the locals feeling about this big news?
Well, it's obviously just come to light over the last couple of days and it's been a bit of a blow up on all the social groups on social media when you jump on and read all the comments online. Highly favourable by probably half and totally disliked from the other half. So it's definitely going to put a wedge between persons' opinions in our area of the world. Obviously, you've got people that love the sleepy atmosphere that used to be Shell Harbour or the Shell Harbour City Centre area as a whole. And then you've got all the people that now want to actually come and move here and experience why it's such a nice little spot to live.
Yeah, very idyllic. So let's have a look at the numbers here. So 11,700 potential homes, but maybe the more important number might be 28,000 additional residents expected by 2041. Now, that tells you why planners are looking at density now. So Shell Harbour is going to grow, but will the infrastructure grow with it? You know, it's a bit of a balancing act, which is probably all part of the conversations that you're hearing there.
That's exactly the point. Obviously, we've had some experience here with already some newer areas being built in Shell Harbour City at Tullumbar and Calderwood, with not a lot of infrastructure done prior to them estates obviously going ahead. And it's almost to the escarpment already. It's been a lot of growth through that area. A lot of negativity about, obviously, no road infrastructure, public transport, other schooling, other shopping centres, etc., to match all the new addition of people and homes coming into the space. And when you're talking about 28,000 odd persons in 15 years, in only 15 years, that's roughly about 40% increase in our actual population that's already here. So significant amount of number of persons if you don't have an upgrade to all your services and public transport links, etc. at the same time. It's going to create a fair bit of havoc without some, obviously, input of upgrading of infrastructure for sure.
And up to 10,000 homes around Shell Harbour's city centre. This is a significant change in scale, but there's going to be taller buildings going into the centre itself, lower buildings around the edges. That is a different proposition from simply covering existing suburbs with apartment towers. So I think that no wonder everybody is having a look at this story, because it is telling us something a little different.
Well, it's totally transforming what the area is. In where we're up to, the highest building we've ever had is up to about 8 levels up in that city centre area. They've built recently a couple that have exceeded that down in the Shell Cove precinct, but that was pre-planned and everyone knew about it from many years ago, so it wasn't just thrown out and people were unaware that was going to occur. But going to that size up into that city centre area, and there's already been, I think you're up to about 6 or 7 towers up there that are already built. They have not always been popular and so many persons have actually gone broke on the way of building things, and properties still a fair few years old have never still been sold to this day. So it's going to be very interesting to see who's going to be game enough to take on this sort of build in this area that hasn't historically been well received by people in the space.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.